All right, burgeoning viewers, one quick note for you. A subscriber a day in October. If we hit 31 subscribers in 31 days, one lucky subscriber will walk away with the entire Modern Horizons art card series. Additionally, a comment a day. Any subscriber that leaves a comment in every video posted by MTG Burgeoning during the month of October will become eligible for the November Pack Wars. On November 1st, a list of all subscribers that left a comment on every MTG Burgeoning video during the month of October will be compiled, and from this list, one subscriber will be randomly chosen to participate in the November Pack Wars. So hope for peace, but prepare for war. MTG Burgeoning community, welcome back to Kitchen Table Series Friday. And if you're not a part of the community, you can remedy that real quick. Just click that subscribe button right below the screen. What do you got to lose? There's so much to gain. Can you believe it, folks? We're on deck number 16 of the Kitchen Table series. Boy, a series that started months and months ago with our mono white equipment turn 2 win, and now we're all the way through our monocolor decks and each of the allied and enemy pairings. All that's left now is to transition to our 3-color decks, and here we're going to start with our shards. We're going to start with our Esper shard. That's going to be white, blue, and black. And the theme of focus of this deck, artifacts. Esper Artifacts. That's our Kitchen Table Series deck tech today, number 16 in the series. So let's start off as we normally do with our mana base. So if we're creating an artifact deck, let's go all out on the artifact theme. 4 copies of Ancient Den. It's an artifact land. Come on, camera, get in the game. Come on, camera. There we go. 4 copies of Ancient Den. It's an artifact land. Taps for white. We're in Esper color, so we're in white, we're in blue, and we're in black. And you're going to notice a theme here early on, folks. Seed of the Cyanide is next. Our blue artifact land. Well, let me reframe that. Our artifact land that produces blue mana. And lastly, you guessed it, folks, we've got a playset of Vault of Whispers, our artifact land that taps for black. Staying on theme with artifact lands, we have one playset of Darksteel Citadel, artifact land that's indestructible, and it taps to add 1 colorless mana. Darksteel Citadel. Rounding out our mana base for our lands in this deck, lands number 17 through 20, one playset of Glimmervoid. At the beginning of the end step, if we control no artifacts, we sacrifice Glimmervoid. And outside of a Shatterstorm or a Vandalblast, and even that, we have our Darksteel Citadel, so that should not be too much of a problem. Tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Just like that, 4 copies of Glimmervoid. And those are the 20 lands that we're including in this deck. Okay, so we got our 20 lands in our 60-card deck. So let's package these up and get them out of the way. As you can see, 16 of the 20 lands are artifact lands, and the other 4 lands are assisted when we have artifacts in play. All right, so now let's get to some more of our artifacts in this deck, and here in this subset of cards are going to be some artifact ramp. And we're going to start with Mana Crypt. 0 to play, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we flip a coin. If we lose the flip, it deals 3 damage to us. Tap to add 2. So, for the purposes of MTG Burgeoning, and if you remember when we did our Is It coin flip deck, this is going to damage us every single turn. But fear not, we have many, many lifelink and ways to gain life in this deck. So Mana Crypt is artifact number 1 for our ramping. Mox Opal is number 2, cost 0, has the Metalcraft ability. Tap to add 1 mana of any color. Activate this only if we control 3 or more artifacts. Should not be a problem. And of course, kitchen table. So we're throwing in a Soul Ring. Everyone knows Soul Ring. All right, after the Soul Ring, we have a Mana Vault. Costs 1, taps to add 3 colorless, but we have to tap 4 mana during our upkeep to untap it, and if we don't, 1 damage. Again, with the Mana Crypt and with the Mana Vault, we have some ways to gain life. Don't worry about that. And lastly, for our artifact ramp, we have 2 copies of Thran Dynamo. So that's 1, 2, that's 6 artifact ramp spells to go with our 16 artifact lands and our 1 playset of Glimmer Void. So far, 22 of our 26 cards are artifacts. All right, now, next up, we are going to play with a playset of Trinket Mage. For 2 and a blue, it's a 2/2 human wizard, and when it comes into play, we may search our library for an artifact card with converted mana cost 1 or less. We reveal that card and put it into our hand. 4 copies of Trinket Mage. So let's just, look at this for a second. It comes into play. We search our library for an artifact card with converted mana cost 1 or less. We just showed 4 very strong artifact cards that ramp us up with a converted mana cost of 1 or less. However, that's not all, folks, because all we have to do is shift off these Glimmer Voids, and here are 16 more artifact cards that have a converted mana cost of 1 or less. This is considered an artifact. Its converted mana cost is 0, and it's fetchable with a Trinket Mage. So the Trinket Mage comes into play. It gets us an artifact land, or it gets us one of those choice artifact ramp cards. 4 copies, 1 playset of Trinket Mage, and I think that's pretty indispensable in this type of deck. All right, so let's talk about some protection for us in this deck. We're going to need some removal. We're going to need some ways to keep us healthy as we start to, build this artifact engine that you're going to see. And one way to do that is a playset of Swords to Plowshares. 4 copies. 1 white's instant, exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. 4 copies, Swords to Plowshares. Some other ways in which to protect ourselves. And again, some of these selections are very meta-specific. So take these cards with grains of salt and, swap out other ones if you're planning to build a deck similar to this to match the strengths and the weaknesses of your metagame. And here's a couple of examples right here. We have Grafdigger's Cage. And for 1, it says creature cards can't enter the battlefield from graveyards or libraries, and players can't cast cards in graveyards or libraries. In my metagame, Living Death is a very, very popular way to play. Lots of Living Death decks. Additionally, there is a, what is that guy's name? The mirror that when it dies, it deals 2 points of damage to you. And the Havengal Lich deck, which can bring that into play from the graveyard by casting it through Havengal Lich's ability, and then a card like the Black Enchantment that gives creatures you control -1/-1 and reduces creature spell costs by 2. I don't remember the name of it. And then the mirror would die and deal 2 points of damage. Well, Grafdigger's Cage stops all that. So again, that's a meta-specific selection. Similar to Tripnoose. Emrakul is probably one of the most popular creatures in my metagame, and can't target it with colored spells and protection from instant spell. She's a nightmare. But Tripnoose can tap her down before she goes to attack, and that's why it's in this deck. All right, and lastly, we have Crawl Space, and another very, very popular theme in my meta, token decks. Lots of tokens. Everyone's trying to go wide. With Crawl Space in play, they're only going to send 2 at me. Okay. So those are some cards that can protect us throughout the game. Now let's talk about some cards that we can use to help us out during the game to establish what we're trying to do and win the game, of course. And that begins with 2 copies of Cranial Plating. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each artifact we control. Equip cost is a colorless. Casting cost is 2 colorless. But for 2 black, we can attach Cranial Plating to target creature we control. And notice, it doesn't say equip, it just says attach. So we can send a few creatures, hold Cranial Plating back, and then when one of those creatures is not blocked, we quickly attach Cranial Plating to that creature and whoop up on our opponents for a big amount of damage. 2 copies, Cranial Plating. Next we have, this is a great card. We have Machinate. 1 and 2 blue is an instant. We look at the top X cards of our library, where X is the number of artifacts we control. We put one of those cards into our hand and the rest on the bottom of our library in any order. We will have so many artifacts in play that we should be able to find any card that we need by casting Machinate. Very good card. Excellent card. Mimic That. This is not a very creature-heavy deck, so when some of our creatures of our opponents die, we will benefit by using Mimic That. However, we do have one creature in this deck that would be very, very good to exile with Mimic That. We'll get to that in a little while. So Mimic That, it costs 3, has the imprint mechanic. Whenever a non-token creature dies, we may exile that card. If we do, return each other card exiled with Mimic That to its owner's graveyard. We can tap 3 and tap this to create a token that's a copy of a card exiled with Mimic That. It gains haste, and then we exile it at the beginning of the next end step. Okay. And this card took some convincing for me to include this card, but after doing so, it's definitely worth it. Blink Moth Urn. Now, one of my deck building principles is not to include cards that are going to help my opponents. It has to have more benefits to me. It has to have even more benefits than that. And definitely Blink Moth Urn can do that here. For 5, at the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, if Blink Moth Urn is untapped, that player adds a colorless mana to their mana pool for each artifact they control. Yes, our opponents will most likely have some artifacts. Yes, they will be able to generate some colorless mana, but they will not be able to generate as much as we will, because our artifact lands are going to count, and all of our artifact ramp is going to count. So although it does help out our opponents, it helps us out much more. All right, so now let's move on, because we're almost done here, folks. Let's move on to the Planeswalkers we've included in this deck by starting with Karn, the Great Creator. His static ability says, activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control can't be activated. A real artifact hoser for our opponents. +1 until our next turn, up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness each equal to its converted mana cost. And for -2, we may choose an artifact card we own from outside the game, or in exile, reveal that card and put it into your hand. So we tap this for 4, we can already do its -2 ability and just seek out any artifact that we need. Karn the Great Creator is pretty sweet in this deck. Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas. Comes in with 3 loyalty counters, +1, look at the top 5 cards of our library. We may reveal an artifact from among them and put it into our hand. -1, target artifact becomes a 5/5 artifact creature till end of turn. And -4, target player loses X life and we gain X life, where X is twice the number of artifacts we control. And as you can see, we're building quite an artifact base here. Tezzeret the Seeker, 3 and 2 blue, +1, untap up to 2 artifacts. -X, search our library for an artifact card with converted mana cost X or less and put it onto the battlefield. Keeping in mind, we can -0 and put a land right into play. And finally, -5, artifacts we control become artifact creatures with base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn. So if we tick Tezzeret up to 5 and then we -5 him, all of our lands that are artifacts can turn into 5/5 creatures for a turn. Tezzeret, Artifice Master, 3 and 2 blue, +1, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. For 0, we brainstorm. I'm sorry, that's wrong. I said that the wrong way. That's Jace, my mistake. For 0, we draw a card, and if we control 3 or more artifacts, we draw 2 cards instead. We're going to control 3 or more artifacts, so Tezzeret is going to draw us 2 cards. And if we tick up to 9 or more, we can take off 9 loyalty counters and get an emblem with, at the beginning of our end step, we search our library for a permanent card and put it onto the battlefield. Tezzeret, Artifice Master. And then that will bring us to the last of our Planeswalkers. And this one we have 2 copies of because he's just going to be that good. Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge. For 4 blue and a black, he comes into play with 5 loyalty counters and has a static ability of creature and planeswalker spells that we cast have affinity for artifacts. So we can +2 Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, and he'll deal X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of artifacts we control. We gain X life. That's a plus ability. It's not a minus ability. It's not a Big Bang ultimate ability. That's his plus ability. Amazing. Just that ability alone is the reason why there's 2 copies of him in here. -3, we can return target artifact card from our graveyard to our hand. And his -8 ability is to exile the top 10 cards of our library. We put all artifact cards from among them onto the battlefield. It's that +2. That +2 ability is just too good for the number of artifacts we have in this deck. 2 copies, Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge. All right, so now let's move to some of the creatures that we have in this deck. Of course, not excluding the Trinket Mage. Trinket Mage is strong in this deck. It does some work. All right, next creature up. Muzio, Visionary Architect. For 1 and 2 blue, we have a legendary human artificer. Tap 3 and a blue, look at the top X cards of our library, where X is the highest converted mana cost among artifacts we control. We may reveal an artifact card from among them, put it onto the battlefield, and then put the rest in the bottom of our library in any order. So we look through the top, we dig through the top of our library, find an artifact that we like, get it into play, don't even have to cast it. Okay, next up, if we're running an Esper deck and it's an artifact build, you know who's not going to be too far behind if we're bringing out the creatures. And there he is. Urza, Lord High Artificer. 2 and double blue. It's a legendary human artificer for 1 and 4 body. And when he enters the battlefield, we create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with. This creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact we control. We can tap an artifact we control to add a blue. And we can tap 5, shuffle our library, then reveal the top card. Until end of turn, we may play that card without paying its mana cost. This is one of the mana sinks we have included in this deck. A great place to put all of the mana generated from Blink Moth Urn. And Urza Lord High Artificer has 2 copies. And there they both are. 2 copies of the high one. All right, remember earlier when we were talking about we have ways of gaining life? Well, here's a beauty for this deck. The Filigree Angel. 5/2 white and a blue. It's a 4/4 artifact angel. It flies, and when it enters the battlefield, gain 3 life for each artifact we control. Wow, 3 life for each artifact. All of our artifact lands, our artifact ramps, our other artifact cards that we have included, 2 copies of Filigree Angel. All right, next up we have one playset of what will be considered one of the most powerful creatures in this deck. Not the most powerful, but definitely one of the most powerful. And that's going to be Sphinx of the Steel Wind. It is this creature that made me want to build this Esper Artifact deck. It's so nice that it's not legendary, even though it has a lot of Akroma-like abilities. Akroma, Angel of Wrath. Yeah, look her up. Imagine her power level back in the day. Even now she's strong. Imagine her back then. She was a nightmare. Well, Sphinx of the Steel Wind mimics some of those abilities. For 5 and an Esper, it's a 6/6 artifact Sphinx. It has flying, it has first strike, it has vigilance, it has lifelink, protection from red, and protection from green. In my meta, this creature gives my opponents nightmares. There's a lot of green, and there's a lot of red. And when Sphinx of the Steel Wind comes down, they're in trouble. The lifelink is great. The vigilance is great. We can block. We can attack. The flying and the first strike. Sphinx of the Steel Wind is such a strong card. I just built an entire deck around featuring this card. 4 copies, Sphinx of the Steel Wind. And our last creature of the deck. Just 1 copy. He's got to be in there. There he is, Big Daddy C, Blightsteel Colossus. We all know about this guy. An 11/11 trampling infector. He's indestructible, and if he's put into our graveyard from anywhere, we're shuffling him right back into our library instead. He's a win condition. Generally want to stay away from using Blightsteel Colossus because, this is not an infect deck. I do have an infect deck. He's not part of it, of course, but he's not very well liked. But still, he's very powerful. He must be included as just a one of. Well, it's a one of for now. ... And with that foreshadowing in mind, I want to introduce to you the last two cards of this deck. It's one card, two copies, and it is a masterful addition to what this deck is trying to do. And that card, no pun, all puns intended, is Masterful Replication. 5 and a blue. It's an instant. We choose one. We create 2 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature tokens. For me, that's just to me. I mean, it's okay. That's not the reason why I wanted to include it in this deck. It's the second mode that interests me the most. Choose target artifact we control. Each other artifact we control becomes a copy of that artifact until end of turn. So let's think about that, folks. We have 20 artifact lands. We have a bunch of artifact ramp cards and some other artifacts that we have on our battlefield. The Blightsteel Colossus is an artifact. We tap 6, and now suddenly every artifact land and every artifact ramp and every artifact defensive card is a Blightsteel Colossus. What if he's not on the battlefield? What if it's Sphinx of the Steel Wind? We cast Masterful Replication. Every artifact land, every ramp, every rock is now a copy of Sphinx of the Steel Wind. Maybe we want to go a little bit different with it. Maybe we've got Urza, Lord High Artificer on the battlefield and we already have a Blink Moth Urn. Well, prior to our upkeep, we'll cast Masterful Replication, and every other artifact is a Blink Moth Urn, generating us so much colorless mana that we can just cast our entire deck. That is an amazing addition to this deck, the Masterful Replication. 2 copies. Any artifact we control, choose target artifact we control. Each other artifact becomes a copy of that artifact until end of turn. An entire board of Sphinx of the Steel Winds with that vigilance. Unbelievable. And that's it, folks. That is MTG Burgeoning's Esper Artifact deck. What do you think? It's got some power. There's some spice in this deck. This is a deck that's probably more borderline unfair than it is fun. But sometimes you got to have some variability in decks. Not every deck can be fun, like we saw with last week's deck when we were talking about Golgari Garruk. Who doesn't want to run a Golgari Garruk deck? It's just too much fun. This one, not so much. Power level's a bit higher, but that's the way the news goes. All right, folks, this is MTG Burgeoning, and this is the Kitchen Table Series, and this is Deck Tech number 16. Check in next week when we roll out with Grixis. Want to become a Pack Wars combatant? 4 easy steps. Step number 1. Click on the link below in the description or go to www.buymeacoffee.com/MTGBurgeoning. Step number 2. Select either membership or support. Membership will enroll you into Pack Wars for $5 each month. Support will cost $5 for 1 month. Step number 3, complete payment information. The name you use will appear on the site. Use your real name, use your YouTube handle, or use no name at all and be anonymous. Be sure to include your email address in the information. Step number 4, most importantly, prepare for war.